Hello and welcome to Betting People Part 2 with Tom Stanley. Now, in Part 1, we discussed your background and punt methodologies. Many people will know you for your tipping, but they'll also know you as the face, some will say, of Matchbook's content and indeed their podcast. And I wanted to ask you, because I'm sure you'll tell us about the podcast, Matchbook has had quite a bit of acclaim, but since you moved there, a number of podcasts have come onto the scene, and it's now a very packed space, which was once a rather sparsely populated niche space. How do you guys keep ahead of the game, and what do you do to keep it fresh? Because it's not as if there's only 2 or 3 competitors now. There's TV and there's online, and there are many really well-funded challenges essentially to what Matchbook are doing.
Yeah. I think when I started with Matchbook, it was really right at the start of the content and the podcast. From the outset, what they said to me, and the guys that run it are genuinely fantastic, who know exactly what they're doing. But it was pretty clear that for all we can have you have a joke around on a podcast, and that's nice for people to listen to. I think we wanted it to be quality content, informative content, unique if possible content for bettors. I never know how to say that word, but bettors, who want to bet better, to know better what they're doing. So it as much as it's got to have that lively, banterous feel, that is not the first port of call. So that was clear from the start. That we really want it to be good content. If we're going through a race, for example, we won't do it for the sake of it. We'll have a chat beforehand, whoever the guests are, and we'll say, if you don't fancy anything in this race, it might be that Envoy Allen's running, but we're not kind of here to blow smoke up that horse's arse. We're here to hopefully put up bets or lays, or however you want to phrase it with, or do it with Matchbook, because that is how that's the feel we want to have, that we're hopefully experts putting their opinions across. You're right, definitely, that a lot of, I don't know whether to say competitors, but there's just a lot more content out there, be it produced by bookmakers or be it produced by, people in their living room. I used to have a podcast with Ollie Bell and Nick Goff that focused on NFL, football and horse racing. Nick was the beating heart of that, to be honest, particularly with his football and NFL. I know he's been a guest on this. And I suppose that was for people who want, a shrewd angle, but equally that had the more sort of banterous feel to it. And I actually quite like about Matchbook that we have a little bit of that, and we've got a consistent group of guests now on the horse racing podcast and on the others, that, it's got that sort of, I want to say family feel almost, because it's a nice group of people, we all get on, but hopefully we're putting across good opinions and finding people some winners. And the horse racing podcast has got a great following. Certainly in the last 6 months or so, since we got consistent guests on, it's still not as well viewed or listened to as the NFL podcast or the football podcast, and I think that's because of it's very well viewed comparatively, but I think that's because where horse racing is in comparison to those other sports, right? The other sports are, particularly NFL over here, from a betting point of view, that is sharply on the rise. And the other thing, Will, that we've done, not from the start, but certainly the last couple of years, is what you and I are doing now, and we do it in Vision, because since coronavirus, people don't listen, I don't think, to podcasts as much. I don't know about you, but I listen to podcasts normally when I'm in the car or on a train, and I'm not doing that so much now. And I don't really walk around the house listening to podcasts, because if I try to, I get sidetracked doing something else. So whereas I do watch, your Star Sports interviews, I watch them and listen at the same time, because I tend to be on the laptop, or you can get it on your smart TV. You can get YouTube on your smart TV, right? So you can watch it like that. So that's been a huge plus, I think, getting that technology involved. We live stream it, so it's done live and then repeated, etc. So I think that's a way that we started doing that before most. But otherwise, you're relying on your content, right? That's it, because there's a lot out there. So you've got to hope that people want to keep coming back, because hopefully you know what you're doing, and hopefully across those 3 sports we do.
Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon actually recently, this sort of lost the commute in terms of what people will listen to or what they will tolerate for now. Although, interestingly, the whole situation of last year has seen a lot of people starting podcasts, which is a move in and of itself. Going on from that, actually, let's talk racing TV for a little bit. I wouldn't know if you'd be privy to those figures, but since the start of lockdown 1, have you seen a rise in viewing figures for racing TV?
I think members wise, because of the extra program, certainly on that, so on Racing TV Extra, which is how I don't really watch it on the TV now. I watch it on my laptop, on my mobile phone. I cast it from my mobile phone to my TV, because you can select which racetrack you want to watch from. So I think I'm not privy to figures, but I think that's seen a boost in memberships because of that the options you have there. I think the Irish coverage, which, let's be honest, it got off to a slightly rocky start. You only have to go on Twitter to see that. And one thing I think Racing TV, we always said was, look at the team we've got, look at the quality of team we've got.
Yeah. And
that's now really starting to shine. You know, Kevin and Ruby yesterday, we're doing this on Monday, they were on great form. We've benefited with the Irish racing, although we lost Fairyhouse on Saturday, has, I think, really benefited from, you know, Gorham Park last Thursday. Where were we on Wednesday? I was covering it. Again, Ruby and Gary were there for a steward's inquiry, which was an absolute abomination of a decision, he says, pocket talking. There you go. But Ruby and Gary covered that brilliantly. And I think the team we've got is absolutely fantastic, and they're really shining now. And I think that's been really positive. And I hope that I don't know whether people are really utilizing Racing TV Extra as it can be, because I think, you know, when I watch the football on Amazon Prime, I pick what I want to watch, and I do the same with racing on Racing TV now, and have At the Races up on another screen, because you know, I want to watch that stuff as well. So because I want to pick and choose, and there are always going to be those people that want to sit down and watch a Saturday afternoon on ITV. Absolutely, I get that, and that's a slightly different audience perhaps you're catering for. But I like that audience, and I think, you know, by and large it's pretty well received, and it you know, surely it's only going to grow, because that is, more people are at home now. That is how I think in the future we are going to be watching sport, because we can pick and choose as we like.
Absolutely. And it's, again, as you say, not just for racing, but for many other sporting events. Moving and changing tack quite differently now, and going back to punting, we are, of course, speaking whilst the Gambling Act is being reviewed. This is going to have huge consequences, whether even you're a casual punter, or even if actually you don't even work in the gambling industry, but you do, perhaps not even in racing, but in any sport. Tell me broadly what you think about the developments with it. You know, do you think it's long overdue that we had this legislation being reviewed? What would you hope to see from it? Would you have any fears from it? Because Martin Cruddas, CEO of Arena Racing, was on Sky Sports yesterday. He fears that the sport apparently will lose to low end £60 million. He says it could be as much as 100 million. But there are also others like Carolyn Harris and Matt Cousin, who believe that such figures are being inflated. Where do you stand on, I guess, all those issues?
So figures wise, I you know, between 60 and 100, I'm not sure which end it would be nearer, but neither's good. I think it's a massive concern. I think first of all, you know, I think there had to be a review, because there was a period where, you know, gambling was that it was that there needed to be tighter legislation about it. I think most people would admit that. You know, certainly over the last decade or so. You know, lots of stories emerging in the press about people who may feel that they were targeted when it was obvious they had a problem, etc. The issue is, I think, when sports betting is pulled in with online casino betting. And when that happens, I think a horse like racing, which is to an extent reliant on the gambling industry, because that is how our industry is formed, right? They are intrinsically linked. There's no getting around that. I think if you are going to have people who aren't problem gamblers unable to put more money in their account until the end of the next month, then they are going to lose interest in the sport, and that has to be a major concern. It's going to affect the sport's popularity. It's going to affect the levy. The trouble is, we live in this world now where, quite rightly, with regards to smoking and drinking, it is less fashionable than it used to be. Smoking is a thing that, you know, when I was 18, it just had to be done. That was it. Now, I have a completely different view of it. Alcohol is on a similar path, loosely. I think it's seen as more a vice, perhaps. Certainly amongst young people, the less and less trendy thing to do. And, you know, gambling is pulled in with those sorts of things. For all I'm not exactly sure it should be. It is a problem for a lot of people, but sports punting doesn't have to be and shouldn't be considered the same as, say, your unlimited casino betting that you can do. But that's where we're headed. That's the worry. I think the government has to be seen on a grander scale to be doing something about it. And if you're limiting punters to depositing £100 a month, then you are taking so many punters out of the game. If you haven't seen Nick Goff's thread that he did, I don't know if you've seen it on Twitter, and I don't want to quote all of that. He just highlighted all the people it would impact. Massive, you know, it would impact me. I'm not a, you know, I talked about how I wanted to be a professional gambler. Well, it didn't happen. I wasn't good enough, and I didn't make it work. But, you know, I love punting now, and every day I'm working, I will probably have the odd bet or two because I've studied a card. And even if I'm not, I'll chuck a few quid after something. You know, last week between Maidan and a couple on Friday and Saturday afternoon, before I got lucky in the Sky Bet chase, you know, I'd done between £500 and £1,000. It was gone. But, you know, that's because I'm used to that. And equally, then I had a good result and, you know, made some, and that was great. And I pretty much know whereabouts I'm going to be at the end of the year, because I've been doing it for so long, and I'm comfortable with that. But if these restrictions are introduced, do I want to have to go and prove that I can afford to lose more than £100 a month? Are people going to do that? I struggle to see it. And then they're driven in different directions towards, you know, gambling which isn't accredited, in black market gambling, whatever you want to call it, or people just lose interest. And that has to be a huge worry for the sport, for all sports, but particularly horse racing.
Just a couple of follow-ups on that. Firstly, you know, regarding accreditation checks, people will say you have to prove your identity to get a betting account. You have to submit ID verification. Would it really be that much more of a stretch, say, to give a utility bill? You know, you went for all that to open the account. Would people really not do it to keep it? And also, a follow-up question after that: have you submitted these views to the consultation? One from the Gambling Commission, one from the government itself on this matter.
No. And perhaps I should, if I feel like I do about it. I think it will stop people. I am sure, because I was for a period. So I basically, betting wise, I have I'm mainly Matchbook Exchange punting. Because that's how I like to bet now. I like to bet in running, etc. And you know, I like to lay horses as well, if that's the angle I can find. But also, I have a few bookmaker accounts which I will use, and they are, you know, muggy accounts effectively. But I'm hoping to be able to land the big ACCA one day, and I just use 2 or 3 I have solely for that, for, you know, a big ACCA. They'd all be well down this year, but I'm just hopeful that I've been close before, that I can land the amount where you go, hey, where you actually walk home and tell your wife about the day's gambling. You know, look what I did today. So that's what I have. But one of those bookmaker accounts, I found my old login details from when my brother and I had a great idea to become an affiliate with a website we were going to set up when I must have been 21. So we're talking 14 years ago. And I found the old login details, and it said, you need to submit ID. I'm not doing. I genuinely thought, well, can I really be bothered to do that? I had to submit a couple of forms or something to prove my identity, and it sat there for like that for 6 months, because I know it sounds silly, but I felt it was a faff. And I think the extra thing of providing utility bills is going to be a huge wall for people who aren't even the level below professional gamblers. I just don't think they're going to be bothered.
Fair enough. And one thing, an affordability check has been mooted as one of the potential measures. Two other measures that I'd like to get your view on. Again, these are hypothetical measures. We are in consultation stage. I feel like I should say that. Number one, some sort of barrier for net deposits that would trigger affordability checks. That's been mooted. Would you think that there would be a reasonable amount at which point a bookmaker should check, can you afford to bet X or Y amount, and if so, what is it?
That is a hard question, because I can give a personal answer, but the thing is, everyone's personal circumstances are so different. It's I think it's incredibly hard to determine what someone can afford to lose. How do you do the guy that only bets anti-post on the Cheltenham Festival and at the Cheltenham Festival? How do you determine through the year what they can afford to lose? And everyone is earning different amounts, perhaps through different means. I think that's really hard. But I do think perhaps the bookmaker asking the punter to set their own limit isn't going far enough. And I don't want to come across as though something doesn't need to be done. I'm fully aware that it does. I've been in a darkish place with gambling before, when I was trying to make it work, and maybe it could have gone the wrong way. So gambling is a problem for lots of people. And when it comes to young people, there are startling and frightening statistics about how young people, underage people, are able to gamble, and that is wrong. Not only because it's against the law, but it's not healthy for people. That is when gambling is becoming into vice territory.
Yeah.
It's got to be fun, but I feel it's really hard to answer what the limit should be for it, because it's so hard to impose a blanket limit, because everyone's circumstances are so difficult. I feel I haven't really answered that properly, but I can't give you a number, if you know what I mean.
No, absolutely. And just one last thing, a measure that has been constantly breached, and indeed actually was on the Times last week and also in the Telegraph, is the idea that you could ban gambling advertising. Now, this has mainly been about shirt sponsorship so far, and logos in sports. Would that be something, would you think that's a good or necessary measure to come from the review? And I ask that because Matchbook is a bookmaker or a platform that does sponsor, as the Star. We sponsor, of course, the Ground Derby. Of course, I'm not sure that would go, but in terms of general advertising on TV, etc., would a blanket ban on that, do you think, be an acceptable outcome?
Not a blanket ban, no, because I think, so if you take different sport, if you take horse racing, for example, I think bookmakers should and have to be allowed to sponsor races because of the levy, because of how important it is to have that money coming through. And if they're not allowed to sponsor races, then they're going to change tack, right? Because why would they? The 365 tax amounts were released recently, and
yes,
Denise is the top paying
taxpayer in the UK.
Yeah, that's a lot of tax as well. So, and I think that rubs some people up the wrong way. Look how much, look at the profits. Yeah, but look at the tax, right? She didn't go and live in wherever, so she didn't have to pay tax. So I think ultimately that, well, it certainly shouldn't be viewed as a negative. And I think the issue is, and Gary Lineker has been very vocal about this, and for the gambling industry, it's dangerous when somebody with Gary's reach starts banging his drum about this, is shirt sponsorships in football, when on a Sunday at 4 o'clock, you've got dad and the young kids sat down to watch football, and they have to say, you know, oh, what's so and so as a bookmaker, as a shirt sponsorship. You know, for me, I've got a 15-week-old now, and when he's 6 or 7, if he sees a bookmaker sponsor on a shirt, it wouldn't bother me at all, because I'm comfortable with the industry. But I can see why some people aren't. And I can see it going that way. I can see bookmakers not being allowed to sponsor in that way. But I think, and you've obviously got in football, is it still the Sky Bet Championship? I should definitely know.
It's still
that.
the Sky Bet Championship.
It's still the Sky Bet Championship, yeah. So, you know, again, I think it's I don't have such an issue with that. I'm never going to have an issue with it, though, because of the background I come from and how I feel about gambling. But and I think in horse racing, if bookmakers sponsor races, they should absolutely be allowed to, and sponsor yards to a level whereby they're not news outlets for that yard, but where their branding can be seen on yards, saddlecloths, or on their rugs, and on attire that they're wearing. But I think shirt sponsorships in football is a slippery slope, and given the way things are headed, I think that will be taken away.
Okay, I think that's a good part of, or a good way, I should say, on which to end part 2 of Betting People. Thank you very much for your insights in this area, Tom Stanley.
Thanks, Will.
Tomorrow, stick around, because we're going to be asking him the best of your questions. And yes, I can tell you this will include the hair and the cricket. Tune in.